Hey everyone, welcome. This is episode 172 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Dexcom, makers of the G6 continuous glucose monitor, and Omnipod, the tubeless insulin pump that Arden has been using for a decade. In today's episode, we're going to be speaking with John. John was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as an adult when he was an airline pilot. This, of course, meant that he lost his job and had to find different work. We're going to talk to John about living with type 1 diabetes, about losing his job, but moreover, about what he's trying to do to get that job back. When you finish listening to today's episode, if you're moved to try to get a Omnipod Demo, you can go to myomnipod.com/juicebox or click on the links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. Or maybe you'll be interested in finding out more about the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. In that case, you want to go to dexcom.com/juicebox, or again, the links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. Hey, as a little bonus special treat today, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, or you can go to ardensday.com to my blog to see this. But there's a koala bear named Quincy at the San Diego Zoo, and he's wearing a Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. It's pretty amazing. I have a video on my blog of Quincy having his blood sugar checked, having his Dexcom put on, and him getting insulin, which all was really very interesting. It's a short little 3-minute video produced by the San Diego Zoo. It's incredibly interesting, so look for the links for that. Please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise, and always consult a physician before making changes to your healthcare plan. I really appreciate you doing this, and I'm glad we were able to slide the time to make it a little better for you. So thanks so much.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you moving that time. My work schedule, I have various shifts out at the training department, and I just happened to get assigned one that starts at 7 p.m. and goes until 2:30 a.m. last night, so that was enjoyable.
Do you always work overnight?
No. Basically, the way our training department works, since where I work for an airline, and I'm in our flight training department, we have flight simulators that basically run 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so the instructors, have to basically work around 4-hour shifts in there. So long story short, they just kind of cycle through, sometimes I'll get the night shifts that are like 8 to noon, and, other times I'll get the really late night ones because we have so many pilots that have to, go through either new training or recurrent training that they just have to run those things nonstop. So when I do that particular type of instruction, you just have to go with what they assign you.
It just I made me wonder, like, do you ever see anything in those simulations that make you think, oh, I'm not getting on a plane?
Occurred occasionally, and before. Of course, the subject that we're going to be talking about today, when I was on the other side of it, i.e. the student or the pilot that was in there for recurrent training, it was a little bit different perspective, but now I'm the one, causing the problems instead of having to deal with them. So it's a little bit more entertaining from my point of view now.
Excellent. So listen, every once in a while I'm getting like a thumping or something. Are you on a laptop or a phone?
Let's see here. No, I'm going through my computer right now. So let me see if I can make sure there's not anything weird going on outside the door here.
Also, your cell phone, if you have a cell phone with you, move it away from the computer. That definitely helps sometimes.
Yes, I can absolutely do that. So I'll set that on the other side of the room, and maybe that'll help.
Cool.
Oh. All right.
Yeah, my brother works shift work because he does something where they're running basically 24 hours a day too. And,
okay.
And it just, it's funny. He doesn't mind it once he's doing it, but he says that the switching back and forth from different shifts is really hard. He's like once you're in it for a day or two, it's not such a big deal, but he's like the swap from like a day to a night or something like that. He finds difficult, but
yeah.
Definitely.
Well, yeah, it's one of those deals where I try and stay away from that really late one because I'm a little bit more of a morning person, I guess.
Hmm.
So given the opportunity, I let our schedulers know that I'd rather have the one because we do have one that starts at 4 a.m. and then goes until like noon.
Okay.
So I'd actually prefer that one over the really late night one because like for example, even when I have multiple night shifts, I'm one of those people that I'll wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning without an alarm clock just because that's the way I am.
Right. So get into
So
4 and have your day when you're done. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
All right.
So
So John, we don't really start in a real formal way or anything. Just, introduce yourself any way you want to be known, and we'll start talking, and it'll find its path. You'll see.
my name's John Roth. Was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes fairly late in life, age 36. So I'm just coming up on having it for 3 full years now. And very active person, do a lot of outdoor activities and mountain bike racing and so on. So basically, this diagnosis came as a pretty big shock to me. Also, the ramifications on my said chosen career. So currently, I work for an airline as a instructor. However, prior to that, I was a full-time airline pilot, and I've had to make some pretty significant life changes as a result of the type 1 diabetes diagnosis.
Wow. So how long have you been flying? Your whole life, or?
Yes. So basically, I started flying when I was 16. Just started off basically in the summer. Had an interest in flying prior to that. Was kind of into remote control airplanes and that type of stuff when I was a kid. And over the summer, my dad kind of said, well, might as well give it a shot and try the real thing and see if there's anything to this. And started flying small private airplanes when I was 16, and then actually had to wait until I was 17 to take my first, I guess, level of pilot certification. And then I've been flying since then. And after I got done with high school, I went to Ohio State University through their collegiate flight program and continued my training there, and then kind of progressed after college. So yeah, so I've been in it for a little over 20 years.
I really believe that has to be something you just love. Like, it just has to make sense to you when you look at it, because there are people like me who, if you said to me, hey, there's a possibility you could get in this mechanical thing and go up in the air and you'd be in control of it, I'd be like, there doesn't seem to be any good reason for me to do that. And yeah, that sounds like
exactly.
a horrible idea. And yet there are certain people, and I guess we're lucky there are, who look at that and think, I can do that. That's amazing. And to have that feeling when you're so young is kind of special, because I don't know, you just, at 16, how often do you find something you love at 16 you can still love when you're 40? Like that's
right.
Yeah, that's definitely special. When I think of an airline pilot, you were an airline pilot before your diabetes. You were flying like
Yep.
passenger jets and all kinds of things like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I currently work for what's called a regional airline. So we fly for our aircraft are painted for the various air carriers that we work for, and we fly everything from 50-seat jets up to our largest one is 76 passengers.
Okay.
And we fly for basically all the major airlines now, as far as United, Delta, American, and Alaska Airlines. Yeah.
So when you're diagnosed at 36, that's a listen, I think being diagnosed at any age is a real shock, but I think that living,
Right.
I don't know how other people think about it, but I used to have this feeling like when I was younger, I thought like, if I could just make it out of high school, like I made it out of high school, that's
Right.
great. And then you're like in your 20s, you're like, okay, well, if I don't get hit by a car, right? Like maybe that's cool. And then in your 30s, you start thinking, oh, if I don't get cancer, then, when you get to 40, you're like, I did it. Like, I know that's an unreasonable feeling, but you're like, I've been alive for a while now. Nothing really terrible has happened. I've won some sort of a game that's not really existing. Like, I know that's ridiculous, but I used to think like that. Like, I saw my life in stages. Like, if I get past this won't happen anymore. If I get past this won't happen anymore. Every time somebody I know gets divorced, I think, ooh, that makes my odds better for not getting divorced because we all can't get divorced. And
Right.
like, and I have those unreasonable thoughts pretty constantly. So, at 36, you have to, and you're like, you described yourself as healthy, outgoing, active, that kind of thing.
Right.
How does it hit you to be diagnosed with something so life altering at that age? And how much of your age do you think had to do with how you felt about it?
I definitely think that, the age probably gave me a little bit more ability to, I guess, appreciate all the things I still had going for me. It was one of those things where, because I, enjoy an active lifestyle and have a great wife and, have, a lot of things to be thankful for in my life, I could at least look at those and say, well, I still have all of that, and how is this diagnosis going to affect those things? And the big ticket items, if you want to think of it that way, in life that, type 1 diabetes hasn't, I guess significantly, adversely affected those things. Mm-hmm. However, it just so happens that I'm in one of probably a very, very few selected, professional careers that is directly affected by the disease. Right. So it was like, okay, I'm sitting there and, I kind of tell people the story when I went in for my, when I was finally diagnosed, I'm sitting there in a bed in the ICU, looking at the FAA website, at, this particular factor of, how it would affect my medical certification to fly. And it's like right there in big bold face letters, insulin dependent diabetes is a disqualifying event for all medical certification. So
how long had you been flying professionally at that point?
So let's see, at that point I had been flying 10 years with commercial airlines, so passenger service. And then before that, I flew 2 years as an air cargo pilot. So
not only something you love, but it's the way you make your living. And
oh yeah,
and then just like that, like a snap of the fingers, you just couldn't fly a plane anymore.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. So 20 years of effort, and a sidebar to that, at this airline, I had just received notification that the next week I literally had my bags packed to go to upgrade class as a captain. So yeah.
So again, all that work, and you're about ready to kind of take that final step that you've been working at your whole life, and then this happens.
Correct.
Any diabetes in your family? Was it shocking, or when you look back now, do you think, oh wow, this guy's has it, my uncle has it, it's not that crazy?
No, I of course, after all this happened, and when you're in the hospital, of course they ask that same question, and no one that I know of, or that my parents know of in our family, had type 1. My mother, or my grandmother on my mother's side, I should say, had type 2. But other than that, there was very little prevalence of type 1. There were a few other folks that did have some, various, coronary artery disease. There's a bit of that. And then there's also a few folks that did have some other, immune type diseases, but nothing of great significance. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it was kind of odd.
Well, it sucks. It really does. I mean, I know it doesn't. It's sort of meaningless whether you had a background in it or not. But there's, maybe you'd been living your whole life thinking, oh, it might happen to me, or like something to soften the blow a little bit. But no. So tell me something. When that immediately happens, does the company look for other ways to keep you employed, or are you scampering for a job, or what happened to you after, as far as your work goes?
Right. So, at the time, I do feel fortunate, and that's one of the reasons why I actually transitioned to the company that I currently work for, is because, they have a really good reputation as far as, supporting their employees, which is unfortunately becoming more and more of a rarity. And basically what happened there initially is that, we do have, as I said before, I have a lot of things to be thankful for. I had short-term disability. So at that point, you basically just have to call and, let, the immediate upline person for me would be our chief pilot, and let him know that I'm currently out on a medical leave.
Right.
So they put you on a medical leave. And then after that, when it became apparent that, there was in fact, no way for me to return to flying currently, they then said, okay, well, you're on, disability right now. We'll of course keep you on as a employee until that runs its course. Well, you have time to try and figure out this medical issue. And then in that time frame, I then, once I got out of the hospital and had, at least a few weeks, I'm not the type of person that likes to sit around. So, I had a few weeks to try and start understanding more about the disease. I then started to look at the company for other, positions that I could take. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what led me to the training department, because I knew a lot of people at the company, and they say, hey, we do have this position open. You should go and interview with these folks and try and go through that process, because, they felt like I would be a good instructor pilot based upon my experience.
The Omnipod is a 2-part insulin management system. The first part, the pod. The pod is a small device that you fill with insulin and wear directly on your body. It includes a small, flexible cannula that inserts automatically with just the push of a button. And then the pod communicates wirelessly with the personal diabetes manager. And that's how you program your insulin. You tell it, hey, give me a unit. I'm eating 20 carbs, that kind of stuff. Now, the second part of the system is the PDM, the personal diabetes manager. That wirelessly manages your insulin delivery based on your settings. So try to imagine you have this tiny little thing that you wear. It has your insulin in it. And there's this thing you hold that every once in a while you have to pick up and tell it, hey, I just ate something, or turn up my basal rate, or something like that. Now, in this moment, in June of 2018, the PDM is the same PDM the company's been using for a while. But Insulet, the company that makes Omnipod, they just received clearance from the FDA to start marketing their new PDM, which is really cool. It's sleek and touchscreen, exactly what you expect in a cell phone age. So it's going to look like a little Android phone almost, but do all the same things. Incredibly cool. It's actually the first time in the history of Omnipod that the PDM matches the futuristic nature of the pump itself. It used to be sort of this thing, little rubber buttons on it and stuff like that, like you imagine a medical device, but no more. Now we're living in the future, baby. I want you to go to myomnipod.com/juicebox, or click on the links in your show notes, or at juiceboxpodcast.com. And when you do that, you're going to be able to get a free, no obligation demo pod sent right to your house. You'll be able to wear it to see what I'm talking about, and then decide if it's something you want to move forward with. When it is, you tell Omnipod, hey, I want to get this, and they'll help you the rest of the way. It's really very simple. myomnipod.com/juicebox. Do you find it satisfying? And I mean, I'm assuming you missed the flying, but do you at least find the new work satisfying?
I do. It's definitely something that I enjoy. And as we kind of touched upon before, it's sort of one of those things where you get to this point in life, and because I enjoy flying, so much, that it would be hard for me to kind of imagine a career track that would just completely not, or, go away from aviation. So this does, still keep me into things. And, even the flight simulators that I instruct in, are called level D simulators. So they're basically one notch below actually being in the airplane. So I definitely do find it, satisfying. And as I was gaining flight experience, going up through the ranks, so to speak, when I was in college and so on, I was a flight instructor for a while, before getting into commercial flying. And, I do enjoy the instruction side of it, but it's, one of those things where, when I go up and do observation flights or, check flights or things like that, I tell people, I don't look up in the sky and see an airplane fly over that, I wouldn't prefer to be there,
Yeah, no, I definitely think I understand that for sure. Okay. So it's funny because when the disability first kicks in and they use all the language they usually use, like,
Sure.
they're talking to people like, you get this figured out. You're like, figured out? I'm not getting rid of diabetes. So there's no figuring it. There's no figuring it out. But so you're 3 years into 2000, were you diagnosed about 2014?
Yeah. So this coming January will be 3 years.
Okay.
So,
so in that moment when you're diagnosed and you have insurance and all this stuff's going on, do they start talking to you about insulin pumps? Do you look into insulin pumps? Do you not have an insulin pump? Like what is the technology that you're using right now?
Right. So, listening to your show and others, I have, it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's probably a bad thing, but there is some comedy to be found out basically how similar people's experience is at the hospital. Although the hospital has the best of intentions, they literally, get you stabilized in the ICU, and then kind of kick you out the door with a couple vials of, Lantus and, Novolog and some syringes and say, all right, we'll see you in a week with the CDE, and, hopefully you don't kill yourself with this stuff in the meantime.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's, being sort of facetious, but
no, but
whatever.
It's really, it is. It's a little bit of like, hey, this does this. Here's this here's this mathematical formula, which we all know after you have diabetes for a while is pretty useless. And then they're like,
right.
Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's completely preposterous. You're like, are you kidding me? Yeah. So
no more explanation, right? I'm just leaving now.
But
go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah. So as far as, when I did leave the hospital, very, little, I guess, explanation of or rather mention of additional products or technology or what have you. It was literally like, hey, stop by Walgreens on your way home and get one of those blood glucose monitor things. I'm like, okay. And, but as far as that goes, I'm, and that's kind of what led me to send you that initial email. I'm still utilizing MDI for my control, and I'm still continuing to use that. So I use pens, currently use Lantus and Humalog, and then I actually use Novolin R for a lot of times for mealtime bolus.
Okay. So, and you're happy with how things are going because your A1C is pretty great, right?
Yeah, I mean, for the last basically 2 years consistently, I think my highest A1C was 5.8, and I'm currently at 5.1.
That's amazing. So how do you? So this is. Do you have a glucose monitor?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Luckily, that was something that let's see. I believe it was my second visit with the endocrinologist where she had mentioned the Dexcom. Mm-hmm. At that time, they were still on the G4 system.
Right.
And she mentioned that to me, and being of kind of a technical background and someone who is assesses data and likes to mitigate, I guess, as we call in the industry, mitigate threat. I saw that and I'm like, yes, I want that right now.
See, it's interesting because I think your mind must work a certain way to be a pilot, because, when a lot of people reach out to be on the podcast, usually what I'll tell them privately is, hey, look, it's just going to be a conversation. It'll find its own way. I'm not going to give you topics or anything, but you asked me 2 separate times while we were emailing, what are we going to be talking about? And I could tell, I was like, oh, because he really is uncomfortable not knowing what he's getting into before he gets into it. I'm sorry I left you in that space, knowing.
No.
But at the same time, it makes sense that you have an A1C that is that low, because your brain must just think about these numbers in the right way, like in a way that you can make sense of and make adjustments to. But that's still very impressive with shots. Do you have like crazy lows or are you pretty steady? Because I mean, an A1C of 5.1 has got to be what, an average, I'm guessing, but that's got to be an average blood sugar in the mid 80s, maybe.
I think on average I ride right around between 80 and 100 because, as I started to do more, I guess, research and learning more about, just the disease, and not just the disease, but what is normal.
Yeah.
I'm kind of one of those people where, you find out clinically normal blood glucose is kind of defined between 77 to 99, for fasting blood glucose. And so, I looked at that and said, well, that's normal. And that's what is going to give you your best opportunity to, again, avoid or, mitigate the risk of having long-term diabetic complications. So I'm not satisfied making 140 my goal. I want to make normal my goal, because that gives you your best chance at long-term health.
What would you say is the main focus of how you can accomplish that? Do you restrict diet, or do you just think you have a really good grasp of how the insulin works, or is it a mixture?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. And, folks that I have talked to, and, I have, met with a few other folks that have, type 1 and even type 2, it's a combination of, understanding the insulin, just like, you are very, very adamant about, and understanding what it does for you, because as you said, a lot of those calculations that you get initially from even a best intending, endocrinologist or CDE are, I guess, starting points, and you have to figure out, how does this affect me?
Mm-hmm.
And becoming comfortable with that, so that you can, just like you say, be aggressive with insulin and, correct when you need to. And the other facet of that I've found that I'm a firm believer in is that, making dietary changes that are going to, I guess, set you up for success, so to speak.
Are there things you cut out, or were you always eating like this, or are there things that you looked at one day and were just like, this, I can't make this work, so it's gone? Or
yeah, that's absolutely. So prior to my diagnosis, being a pretty active person, and a mountain bike racer, and someone who does a lot of activities, I ate, where my wife and I, have always eaten healthy, because I also have a background in sports physiology and nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, we were eating, fairly healthy and, well-balanced diet, and, stayed away from a lot of processed foods, but, we still ate, more sugary type stuff, particularly when we were exercising. And, because of the level of exercise, we could get away with a lot more because we were burning so many calories.
Yeah, I understand.
But, with the diagnosis, I then had to start looking at, okay, well, what causes a blood glucose, spike or insulin, requirement? So you start looking at, of course, sugar and carbohydrates. And so the process of that was basically, I started off with, kind of removing all of those really simple sugars, and, treats, if you want to think of it that way. I was kind of notorious around my friends for having, a big, hankering for Muddy Buddies. I don't know if you know what those are.
I don't.
They're Chex Mix that are covered in powdered sugar and chocolate.
You don't eat those anymore?
No, those had to go right out the window. Those were gone immediately. So
do you miss them? Do you ever find yourself thinking, Muddy Buddies?
I mean, it's more like I have that thought, but it's more of in a comedic sense. Like, holy crap, I used to, take down a bag of those things and not even think twice about it,
Right.
So, which of course would be preposterous now. I don't even know what that would do to me now.
Well, I guess if you poured insulin over your head, you'd probably be okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know. It's funny when you think about like health and the way people look versus how healthy they actually are. I use as an example sometimes when I was growing up, my parents had these friends, and the husband of the other couple was just this very tall, in shape, lean guy, and he died before any of them. But because he'd be like one of those guys, like, you'd order pizza, he'd eat a whole pizza himself, he wouldn't gain a pound, and somehow, in 1979, that translated into he must be the lucky guy who's just healthy. And no one thought about it past that. So, anyway, he's long gone now because he had a heart attack before he was 50 years old. And
I mean, that's a really interesting, thing to a story rather to bring up, because sort of getting back to dietary and health changes. It's as I started to, I guess use some of the studying techniques and kind of looking back at, things I learned in college, it's that idea where, and I kind of consult folks now with, non-diabetics as well, as far as, attaining a healthy lifestyle, mainly through nutrition. It's that idea where I think in today's society, and this has been kind of propagated, from probably the 80s and so on, and has been probably increased or made more of an issue with media, that a lot of people equate, I guess, body weight or body composition with health. They think, oh, well, they're thin and fit and, they do all this stuff. But from a health standpoint, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a healthy person, like they could, just like that guy, and I have some other examples of similar type stuff where they look very healthy, but you pull their blood work and it's a train wreck.
Right. Yeah. It's just funny how it just sometimes doesn't correlate at all. And,
right.
And you would, but it is kind of the way we're built. Like our brains are built. Like you just look, if you don't look, it's right. Such an odd thing, right? Because quote unquote, if you don't look unhealthy, you must not be unhealthy, and vice versa. And so it is really interesting. I just thought of that because what you're describing, eating that Chex Mix covered in chocolate, like right. I know for my body, if I had even a reasonable amount of that, I'd wake up the next day 3 pounds heavier. Like I wouldn't be able to avoid it. So it's just different people. But so you just completely cut these things away. So did you always think of yourself as somebody with a good constitution for things like that, or is that something you developed for diabetes? So I'm supposed to be telling you about the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, but all I can think about is the video I saw this morning of Quincy the koala bear at the San Diego Zoo wearing a Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. The video is really cool. You can see Quincy getting his blood sugar checked, wearing the Dexcom G6, getting insulin. It's really kind of captivating to watch. I hope you go back to the blog later and check it out. But that's not really what this time is for. This time, which now is less than when I started, is to talk about the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. You hear us talking every day on this podcast about the great things that come from wearing a continuous glucose monitor. Being able to see your blood sugar rise and fall, to know how fast that's happening, to be able to make great decisions about temp basal rates and pre-bolusing, all the things that you hear me talking about here. That information that I get from the Dexcom allows all of that to happen. If you're someone who needs to know what someone else's blood sugar is, the Dexcom features a share and follow app. So one person has the share app, the person who has diabetes, and one person has the follow app, the person who's following along. You can do this with an Apple or Android phone. It's really spectacular. It's how I learned to let go and allow my daughter to do all kinds of things in the world that I couldn't previously imagine her doing. Really is a life-changing device. So between the really cute koala bear and everything else, I really hope you go to dexcom.com/juicebox to learn more about the Dexcom continuous glucose monitor. I genuinely think you'll be happy that you did. Did you always think of yourself as somebody with a good constitution for things like that, or is that something you developed for diabetes?
Yeah, I think, I've always been one of those people that once I see, I guess, really positive either information or, undeniable, I guess, science, if you want to think of it that way, to show that it's a positive thing, and I kind of set my mind to it, I'm able to, I guess, either make those changes or to kind of follow that track, and stick with it. So, I guess as that applied to diabetes, once I started to figure out, well, here's what causes the most amount of, I guess, stress or frustration for particularly type 1 diabetics. Well, if I can work on, and, it's a process. It wasn't like, one day it's just all gone, but it was a process over probably a year to kind of get where I'm at now. Sure. Dietarily. I was able to say, well, those are the things that seem to cause the most amount of issues. So if I can remove those things, that will give me, again, better control of the disease, and therefore, give me the best potential for long-term health. And that was my big goal, to say, all the research and, folks that have diabetes for long periods of time, type 1s, the, I guess, fear I think that a lot of people have is, not so much diabetes, but the long-term consequence of uncontrolled, diabetes. And, just talking with physicians and folks that have been, involved with it for long periods of time, they, a couple in particular said, these are not, a definitive thing that's going to happen. It's preventable, provided, you can get good control of the disease, because I think a common phrase is that diabetes never killed anybody. It's usually the complications from poorly controlled diabetes that causes the problems.
Yeah, you think of, DKA, for example, as something that does happen to people, and it's it's something you can see in the moment. Like you can see like cause and effect. Like I did not take enough insulin, my insulin pump got knocked off, something happened, my blood sugar rose, I went to DKA, this happened, and I got out of it, I got better, I died, like, that. But you don't often think I had Chex Mix on Thursday in November in 2017, and in 2034 this happens to me. You don't think about it that way, but you do, because it hit you that way, and you were able to like make that decision. Plus, you're probably at the right spot in your life, right? 36, you'd had a lot of that. You'd had a lot of that Chex Mix by now, right? Because there's things now. I'm 46, and there are things now that I'm like, oh, that would be good, but like you kind of like, it's not worth it, or I know that'll make my stomach hurt, or blah blah, whatever it ends up, you start feeling, and you're able to pass it by. Maybe it's just because you've had it so many times. Or maybe it's because you've got the time. You got the time into life where you really understand things a little firmer. And it's not like you're 7 and I've got to explain to you how you can't have this, or it would be better if you didn't have this, or whatever.
Right.
I know that the one time Arden stopped eating something, it was her idea. And it, I talked about it a couple of times here, but she heard the doctor talking about A1C, and we were discussing how to maybe get it to move. And we went out to the car, and she's like, what could I do to make my A1C go down? And I remember telling her back then, I was like, you could stop eating cereal for breakfast. I was like, that would make things so much easier for me to figure out.
That would be huge.
Yeah. And it's funny because I couldn't figure it out. Now I can bolus for a bowl of cereal like it's nothing. But back then I just could not figure it out. And so I just figured if you could just remove that from the larger equation, maybe I could focus on some of this other stuff and figure out some of this other stuff. And it's
right.
But you really seem to have. So tell me a little bit about, like, in the course of a day, do you eat, like, how many carbs do you think you take in a day? Or is it?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah, so I'd say definitely in the last year and a half, I became more focused on transitioning my body over to becoming more the term is fat adapted, so that it processes fat more efficiently, both as body fat and then dietary fat. So I would say in a given day, depending on my activity level, big day at work where I'm doing double shifts, I'm just going to be, at work for 14 hours. I probably only take in about 30 grams of carbohydrates the entire day. And then other times when I'm out doing, big mountain bike, races or rides, and where I'm burning 2,000 or 3,000 calories at a shot, I might take in 80 grams of carbohydrates.
Okay.
So, very low carb.
What do you eat besides carbs then? Like, what are you taking in to keep you going?
Well, yeah. So, moderate protein, probably, from a sidebar on that, approximately 1 gram of protein per kilogram. So, I'm 170 pounds, so probably about 70 grams of protein, and the rest of it is, healthy, dietary fats. So, because fat has very little necessity for, coverage by insulin, regardless of whether or not you're a diabetic or not. It just requires very little insulin to process, provided your body has become adapted to being able to metabolize it, efficiently, particularly for activities. If you're, not a, overly active person, it's not quite as challenging. But, if you're highly active, you kind of have to work up to that, or, kind of retrain your body to be efficient with that. But
otherwise you would experience a bunch of lows and
sure. Yeah. So, like with, again, back to the Dexcom, on their dashboard, it shows your time within range, and I only have, like a 1.2% of the time that I've gone low out of range, and my range is between, I modify it, I'll put the low alert, and of course that's another big, huge advantage of having, or rather understanding the technology, is to say, well, when I'm out exercising, I put my low alert at 85, whereas when I'm just, doing normal daily things, I set it at, 75 or 70, so that way when I'm exercising, it gives me that alert earlier, so I can just correct it and it's, done with. And then same thing with the high range, like I have my high range on the Dexcom set to, 135. And so I correct immediately if it even starts creeping up on that level.
Yeah. We correct it at 130.
Yeah.
And any kind of diagonal up or up arrows, I just assume I've messed something up and, more insulin. So you're not afraid to inject though. So you're an adult who has made that decision. Like if you make a bolus for a meal and then, 45 minutes later, you're 130 diagonal up, you'll just pull your pen out again and give yourself more.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. And, again, the education level, and I guess, from doing this, podcast, again, just a huge fan on my own accord. And I, really, admire what you're doing with the community, is just to encourage folks to, educate themselves, because, it's a kind of a cliche phrase, but, knowledge is power. So, and it removes a lot of that fear. So just like you said, if I, maybe went over to, a friend's house or, ate out and there was something in there that I didn't know about, and, I bolused what I thought was correct. And then now it's, like you said, diagonal arrow up and it's at 120, 125 and rising. Yeah. I don't hesitate to say, you know what, here's another half unit of Humalog, and let's, knock that down, because I know exactly what that insulin is going to do, or at least relatively close, as best as you can with absorption and all that stuff. But I know that that's not going to harm me, like by taking an extra half unit, even if it's an intramuscular injection to really cut it down. I know that that's not going to put me at a dangerous low, because, I know how my body responds to that. And I know, I'm comfortable with my insulin dosing, and that's very powerful, and that gives you a lot of control over the disease.
You just said something I'm not sure everybody would understand, but so if you put the insulin in the way you're supposed to, just in, the fat layer, it absorbs in one way, but you can press a little harder, go into a muscle with it, and you get more or quicker or more harsh reaction from the insulin. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yes. So, as you said, usually either through an insulin pump or normal insulin injection, you kind of do it subcutaneously. So you're injecting the insulin into that little layer, again, body specific, but that layer of fat between the surface of the skin and the muscle. Whereas if you inject, it's called IM or intramuscular, you're actually injecting the insulin into a muscle, which has a much higher blood flow to it. So that you're removing some of the media that the insulin has to go through. So you're putting it nearly directly into the bloodstream. So it acts more quickly, and you have, a more, I guess, deliberate response. So it, instead of maybe taking, for like myself, Humalog, like instead of taking 15 minutes to start working, like if I do an IM, literally within 5 or 10 minutes, I start seeing a change in that arrow on the Dexcom.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's little things I don't think we think about too much. So John, and in the last kind of 20 minutes we have here, what I wanted to ask you about is your flying. So this is taken from you, obviously, not something you want. as you look back now, because you still run, do you ever fly the sim? Have you ever flown a simulation and had something happen because of your diabetes and thought, oh, well, I guess it's good I don't have a license to fly a plane anymore, or have you thought, I think I could do this with type 1?
No, I've never had an instance at work. Even I teach classroom stuff. I'm in the simulator. I do all the emergency scenarios, and I can honestly say that I've never had an instance where I thought I would be either unsafe or incapable of performing those duties.
Right.
So, and that's kind of been the big direction. I currently hold in the airline, or rather, those who of course aren't familiar with how pilot certifications work. As a private pilot, so if you're just going to go up and fly around on your own, you have your own airplane or you rent one, small airplanes.
Yeah.
That requires what's called a third class medical, and I actually have been able to regain that level of certification, so I can still fly private airplanes.
Okay.
But the airline world requires a first class medical, and that's where the disqualifying event is for insulin dependent diabetes.
Okay.
And, it's one of those things when you look at the regulations, those regulations were kind of put on the books back in 1967.
Mm-hmm.
And, at that time, of course, it was a, profoundly different landscape for diabetes. It was nowhere near the same, and it just hasn't really been looked at or advocated for until recently. And, I firmly believe that if, a person is well controlled and understands the disease, whether through insulin pump and CGM use or MDI, that you can safely perform those duties and operate safely. Now, with that, again, this isn't meant to be, I guess, offensive, but I also believe that if it's someone who maybe doesn't have as much understanding or is kind of still figuring out the control of the disease, I don't believe they should be in the flight deck, because, someone who potentially has or is not understanding maybe why they went up to 350 and then had to take a large amount of insulin, and then, an hour later they're at 50 and are taking those huge blood glucose swings.
Right.
I don't think that would be safe in the flight deck. And the FAA actually has defined parameters for private pilots that say you have to keep your blood sugar within 100 and 300 while you're flying.
Mm-hmm.
And those same recommendations that were actually derived from work with the ADA, American Diabetes Association, and a board of endocrinologists with the FAA, along with some other recommendations, have been determined as safe levels. And what we're trying to do now is advocate so that they can then apply those parameters to first and second class medicals. So that would then allow me to start flying again. So,
do you think there's a reasonable way to find the difference between a person who can keep their blood sugar in that stable range and who can't? Like, how do you make that decision? Who's who?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. And that's sort of part of the debate. And actually, this particular subject matter has gone all the way up to the U.S. District Court of Appeals. And then it's actually very close to going to the U.S. Supreme Court and ruling on what the FAA should be using as a determining factor.
Right.
And, that's where the CGM comes in, because when I first started this advocacy with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration had no idea, or I wouldn't say they had no idea, but they were unaware of the usefulness or the, not really ability, but the, what CGM could provide. And so, they're trying to decide, while you're flying, you need to be able to show that you were in this range, and they want to see CGM reports and, utilizing the, A1C value and a official report from your treating endocrinologist to, state that you're, you have good understanding, you're able to, monitor your blood glucose, how to use a blood glucose meter. And then, part of the parameters for a private pilot is that prior to takeoff, you have to be able to show a blood glucose reading, above 100, and then you're required every hour to take a finger stick and show that you're within range, and then you have to then show those records during that flight time to show that you were in compliance while you were flying.
Okay.
So,
well, I mean, it's no joke. It's one of those things you completely understand both sides of the argument. Like I've no doubt you could fly an airplane and you're fine. And at the same time, if I'm flying on the airplane, I don't want to be the guy sitting in row 7 the one time your blood sugar plummets out of nowhere and it sneaks up on you, right? And so,
right.
But then as I sit here, I think you could have a heart attack while you're flying a plane. I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen. Aren't there co-pilots? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Right. So what's the point? Listen, John, let me ask you another question. I met a guy maybe a dozen years ago now, and he was flying like the big, heavy, planes for major airlines, moving hundreds of people across the country. And he said that the secret is he could push a button, that plane would take off, and it would land on its own, and he could sit there and sleep through the whole thing if he wanted to. Is that true? Is that true?
I guess it's a slight over. We don't quite have the easy button yet, but there are a lot of the modern airplanes that we fly are very capable. You do have first officers, but it is something that, and we train for that all the time. Incapacitation, of the other pilot, and on a sidebar, there's been more instances of flight deck crews having coronary artery events than issues with diabetes. Because on another note, the International Civil Avionics Association, or Aviation Administration, ICAO, which is all the other countries, including Air Canada and European and also Australia, they all allow insulin-dependent diabetics in the flight deck. And all those countries, so everyone except the United States, not one of those countries has had one single report of incapacitation or inability to perform their duties because of a diabetic event.
Yeah, imagine if you made every pilot check their heart once an hour to make sure it was functioning. Like, you're probably safer than anybody because you're paying such close attention, which is the point we make about people with diabetes all the time, is that they're probably healthier than most people because they're so aware of their health. And and to say that there's never been an incident, like that's what I was trying to get at, which is what's the difference between your blood sugar and any number of other things that happen to other people. Like, if there's a process in place to to fix it, if that happens, then why is your blood sugar different than a heart attack as far as the emergency, steps that you have to take? It doesn't seem like it makes any difference. It almost feels arbitrary.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of the point, is the way in commercial aviation, there are what they call special issuance medicals where, if you're not 100%, in the normal range, so to speak, there's certain conditions, some of which are cardiac conditions, and some of them are, even just medications where you have to get what's called a special issuance medical certificate, where you have to show additional compliance to maintain that medical certificate. Which, if we can move this forward for insulin-dependent diabetics, that's what I would have to get, a special issuance, meaning I would have to provide more documentation and have more frequent checks for compliance than someone who doesn't have the special. And, and with that, it's just a matter of saying, okay, you have this condition, but as long as it's treatable and it's safe, that shouldn't preclude or prevent you from this particular career track, and, as a whole, as a increase to overall aviation safety, the more and more frequent or more prevalence of type 2 diabetes, when you look at it from a pure, statistical standpoint, just the amount of active current airline pilots in the country, well over 100,000 or 200,000 total pilots, in our country, from a pure statistical standpoint, the ability of even type 2 diabetes and then them becoming insulin dependent potentially down the road, you could decimate the population if you just say carte blanche, you're done, no more medicals for you. And, that creates a whole nother issue.
I mean, I assume I'm hearing what you're saying. Like, you feel like you could do this and it's not a problem. I feel like you're willing to, if they put other parameters in place, you're willing to follow them. But, and I hear that, but do you really think they're necessary? Or is this just something you're willing to do to get back in the seat?
You mean, establishing, parameters and so on? Do I feel that's necessary?
And the extra testing and the verifications and stuff, like, do you really think that's necessary? Or, I mean, is it one of the situations where maybe it's not necessary for a person like you, but it might be necessary if we're going to, generally speaking, if we're going to cover all the population of pilots?
Sure. I think definitely an increased amount of, I guess, testing or providing things like either CGM data or those blood glucose, finger sticks while you're flying. Mm-hmm. I think that's reasonable, because it has to be something that the controlling, body, can take to the public and say, here's what we do to make sure that these people are safe. So I have no problem with that. Right. The frustration now lies with the fact that they have these parameters that have been recommended, by a professional or a medical professionals, and right now there hasn't been any movement on it, simply because they just don't feel like it's really all that important. But at the same time, and at the same time, you're looking at, I guess some folks would say, well, it's a form of discrimination, but I don't know if I go quite that far to say it. It's just I guess, lack of need of action on their part. So
there's not enough people. You're not up to the squeaky turbine getting the grease yet. So you need. And so is that something? So how much? Because we're winding up a little bit, but how much? How involved are you in this? And what is it you're trying to accomplish? And at what point? I know I heard you say it's at one level in courts, and it could go higher. I mean, do you think it's something that's going to work out in your professional lifetime, or do you think it's a fight that's going to be fought for a long time?
Well, it's been, I guess, in the background, has been worked on for quite some time. The American Diabetes Association, has been heavily involved, and it's, speaking with all the various flight surgeons and so on. I definitely think that it's going to change. It's just the trajectory, or what the time frame is. Mm-hmm. Luckily, my current position, being with the airline that I'm at, gives me the ability to hopefully wait it out, and hopefully be there when it changes. So I am very optimistic about that, and so I think it will change. It's just, with any large organization, and compounded by the fact of being a government organization, change is slow.
Well, what it occurs to me as you're talking is that the understanding that the FDA had of CGM, for example, was not good until the people at Dexcom really stepped up their efforts to explain it to them. And maybe what your cause needs is a little bit of maybe help from an entity like that, who already knows how to petition the government about things like that. Like maybe that is a bad idea to contact Dexcom and tell them what you're doing and say, do you have the ability to help me explain to the FAA the things that we're trying to explain? Can you back it up with data? Is there something you could do? Because it really does. I think there are a couple of other, like you said in the beginning, there are very few, but there are a couple of other professions where they don't allow people with type 1 with insulin-dependent diabetes to perform. And although I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, at some point, the next year or two, you're using MDI now, but you could easily switch over to an artificial pancreas probably in 2018 that might do a really fantastic job. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So, things are going to change. Is my point.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe that's something to consider, is to try to loop somebody in who really knows the landscape in DC.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where more knowledge and more I guess education or folks that are aware of the real I guess the real capabilities of some of the technology and so on there would definitely be beneficial. So yeah, I mean the organization I'm currently working with is Airline Pilots Association, which is the largest union in the country for airline pilots, and it's something that they've been advocating for very heavily, and just for that reason that they just want the ability to so that this doesn't automatically become a career-ending event, as long as someone's willing to work at it, and then extrapolate that even down towards some of the JDRFs and put people I've met with on that regard, kids and so on. I mean, you take a kid that has this dream of being a pilot, and they want to do it, and it's a terrible thing to sit there and like say, well, sorry kid, you got type 1, so forget that.
The psychological implications are bigger than what we're talking about today. But it's you get this incurable disease, and at the same time, it's possible your lifelong dream is thrown right in the garbage along with all the other feelings that you're having at the moment. And that's you need something to look forward to while you're figuring out diabetes and your health and how to manage day to day and stay safe and stay healthy. Like you can't look up and have no light. And like you said, it's not a lot of people that it's affecting, but it's more than you think. And if type 2s start using more and more insulin, it's going to be more and more people. So no, I'm with you. I think it's a great cause. So I want to wish you a lot of luck, making headway with it. I hope you keep in touch. I'd like to know where it leads and what you're able to figure out. But I know I was going to ask you when we're done, but I'm just going to ask you now while we're talking. So, I'm in Philadelphia, I'm outside of Philadelphia, New Jersey, and we grew up in Philly my whole life. We're baseball fans and everything. And you and I are recording this about a week after Roy Halladay's plane crashed and it's just such a, my question is how frequently do personal planes go down that we don't know about, or is it not as frequent?
A private aircraft, there's quite a few more accidents that you just don't hear about because it's sort of like a car accident. I mean, tons of car accidents. There's actually more deaths from car accidents than airplanes, obviously. But I drove to work the other day and went by 3 car accidents. Well, that never made it into the news because it's a car accident. Right. So with airplanes, usually the ones you hear about are the ones that end up going into, a neighborhood or, having some other, or, involves a celebrity. So, they do crash somewhat frequently, but not, nothing, approaching, car accidents. When I was flying air cargo, it was basically just me and one other person and, an old airplane with, a bunch of car parts or industrial equipment in the back. And, during those 2 years, I lost 6 friends that died in accidents because of the equipment failure and, crashed. Okay. And those never made it into the news, because it's just one airplane and one guy and, crashed out in the mountains someplace in the middle of the night. Yeah.
It's just a aspect of society I don't think we all understand, really. Like that, the idea that 6 people in 2 years crashed in planes, and people were just like, oh, okay. Because at the same time, if they were driving a truck across country and fell asleep and drove the truck off a cliff, it would be the same really reaction, which is that's a shame, and sure, it's a personal tragedy, but in the grand scheme of things, we do expect some people to pass away from car accidents and plane crashes and everything. It is really, I don't know. It's interesting. It's a whole part of the world I don't know that much about. Other than to say, I've always felt safe during air travel. I've never, because it does make sense. Like if passenger planes were dropping out of the sky, somebody would tell me about it. And so I very infrequently hear about anything like that. Yeah, I've never once gotten on a plane and thought, like, I hope this goes well. I've never had that. Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Well, that's good. I guess I'm doing my job, right?
Yeah, you keep them. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I do. I want to thank you for coming on. We hit an hour, but thanks so much for sharing, like, your story and this whole concept of, what goes on if you're a pilot or hoping to be a pilot and you get type 1. I hope it raises some awareness for you. And like I said, please keep in touch. Let me know how it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on and getting the chance to talk with you. And I guess just last parting words, I just want to encourage everyone out there that is dealing with type 1 or even type 2. Just as you say all the time, knowledge is power, and just take that initiative to go out there and educate yourself, because no one else is going to do it for you. You really just have to go out there and get as much knowledge as you can, and that's going to give you the best long-term result, either for yourself or if it's parents dealing with kids with diabetes and so on. Just get that knowledge and apply it, and I think that's going to be the best thing you can do and relieve some of that fear and frustration.
Yeah, the worst thing that could happen to you is you sit back hoping someone's going to tell you, and it never happens. You really do have to be proactive. When something like this happens to your health, you can't just go, well, this is what the guy said, so it's what I did, and it didn't work out, but what am I going to do? He told me. And
right.
And then let it go. You have to go get it. Well, John, thanks so much. I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
Have a great day.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, John, for coming on and sharing your experience. Thank you, Omnipod and Dexcom, for sponsoring the show. Please go to myomnipod.com/juicebox or dexcom.com/juicebox to find out more about those great products. You can also find links in your show notes at juiceboxpodcast.com. Don't forget to go see the video of Quincy on my blog at ardensday.com. I think it's right on the front page. You just scroll down, look for the koala bear. If this is like 2 years later and you still want to see it, go to the blog and then hit the search bar and type koala, because I can't imagine there's going to be more than one post about a koala bear on my diabetes blog. Thank you guys so much for the ratings and reviews on iTunes. We're almost up to 200 ratings and almost up to 100 user reviews for the podcast, which is really fantastic. Thank you very much. Don't forget, this is the last thing. Don't forget, if you're enjoying the show, please share it with somebody else. You are the best chance I have of reaching a new audience member.